On this episode of the Layover Live, Grant stops by to talk cookies, and not the ones you eat. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 157 of the Layover Live, where we bring you the top article from the Layover. I'm Jason Swick, VP of Strategy and Insights, and welcome to our show this week. Happy to have you here. The topic of this week is cookies, third-party cookies in particular. And a colleague of mine, Tracy Legault, who's been on the show several times, you've seen her, once told me to never trust cookies that I couldn't eat. And at the time, she would say that I would have a good laugh, but today I think that she may be onto something. For as long as I can remember, we've been using cookies to better understand consumer behaviors, track visitors to our websites, and collect data for better targeting, all with the hopes of us creating a better overall user experience. But things are soon going to change. Now, unless you've been living on an island trying to escape COVID, which honestly right now is not that bad of a strategy, you have certainly heard the news that the death of third-party cookies is soon upon us. Now, our article of the week this week comes from Engadget.com, where it talks about this and even shares that Google is starting to test some of these solutions out, one of them being FLoC, which we'll get into shortly, right now. Now, if you're like me, though, however, throughout this whole thing and hearing all of this about third-party cookies, I think it's been a real challenge to sift through all of the noise and really get to the bottom line of how this may or may not affect DMOs. I think the question on most every marketer's mind is, how does this affect my marketing and my website? So I wanted to try and simplify things as part of this episode and hopefully not only educate you a little bit on the subject, but also provide you some insights that are needed to make more informed decisions, as there is going to be a lot going on. And listen, there's still a lot that's really unknown. Data privacy, as we've mentioned as of late, is really serious business. And this change is going to affect each of us differently, some of us naturally more than others, depending on your overall marketing strategy. So to talk about this, I wanted to bring in someone who has a pretty good understanding of this right now, and that's our strategic analyst, Grant Stoltz. So Grant, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me once again.
You bet, man. It's been a while. I know we've been out of the office. We'll get back to normal soon, but it's nice to get you from the other side of the camera and in to talk about some of these things, which is your normal day-to-day life, which is really important. So first, I think before we jump into this third-party cookies discussion a little bit, I want to kind of set the stage, Grant, a little bit, as there seems to be a lot of changes, it seems like, of late in regards to privacy. So maybe just a little analysis about what's happened over this last year.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot has happened just over the last year. You could even argue the last 2 or 3 years. It seems like, sometimes they say that, a decade happens in a year and a year happens in a decade. And we're definitely of the former for right now in regards to data privacy and privacy laws and regulations. Mm-hmm. So I think, looking at the big picture, really this kind of all, I think, started with the greater awareness in digital marketing with GDPR, actually. Which was, again, the European Union regulation put in place to regulate data privacy and data collection for websites. I think that really put privacy and data collection practices more so in the limelight than it was previously. Now, you can also add on certain other data breaches that have made headlines, with Equifax and other large corporations that have had their data breached and compromised. So I think overall, just in the zeitgeist in general, there is a greater awareness of one's data privacy, and how their data is being collected, especially on the internet and whatnot. So I think that's the big headline there, is that there is just a greater overall awareness of data privacy. Now that, again, that has trickled down into industries where both are taking advantage of this new knowledge, and then some are also now reacting to this new knowledge. For example, I'm sure many of us have heard of the iOS 14 updates, which again threw a huge wrench in a lot of advertisers' plans, where again, Apple was now taking the mobile data collection and again, putting some rails on that advertisers couldn't look at mobile device IDs or weren't able to access certain data as part of apps any longer. So there's sort of this, again, overall trend and shift away from the Wild West that we once knew of data collection and data privacy, now to kind of a more organized approach and hopefully more lawful approach as well. Again, as we've seen a lot of states over here in the US acting their own privacy and data collection laws. California is one of the ones, namely, where we're looking at just to kind of make sure that, again, we're all staying well within the bounds of what is considered generally acceptable practices for data collection and data privacy on the internet. So really, I think between the general awareness of data privacy, the laws being enacted, and also the corporate policies and procedures being put in place to either prevent or stop data collection, I think that is really just sort of set the stage for all of this. And Google, again, throwing their hat in the ring one step further with this death of the third-party cookie and new data collection and data advertising usages, I think is, the next step forward in this ever-evolving saga.
Yeah, good stuff. And it is, I think it's also important to note too that, right, this is not nothing or anything new. Rather, I think, if we think about third-party cookie blocking, that's gone back even to like 2013. You think about Firefox and even some of the stuff that Apple had done even way back then, right? They've given the ability within those platforms to be able to block third-party cookies for a long time. The scary part, I think now, at least for some marketers out there, is the fact that now Google's throwing their hat in the ring, and a lot of us do a lot of advertising on Google, and Chrome has such a presence worldwide, which I think is it's the number one browser worldwide. And so I think this is why there's a lot of discussion around this topic. And you mentioned the importance of privacy and how privacy is led into this discussion. And there's been a lot of terms that have been thrown around, which I want to kind of get into now, or some of these terms in regards to privacy, Stoltz, because I think it's important to understand, because there's a lot of stuff happening. Things like with FLoCs, which I want you to talk about that. Third-party cookies, for instance. Privacy Sandbox is something that you've heard a lot of. So maybe break down some of these terms so that people might not have heard those things, so they have kind of a better understanding of these terms and what they mean.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's exactly it. That there's a lot of terms. I think a lot of people are confused, some even scared about how this may affect their business, their livelihoods even. And really, I think there's a lot of complex terms thrown around, which hopefully we can break down here just a little bit more. And I think it all kind of comes back to the idea of a cookie and what that exactly is. And it's not the one you can eat. Like you mentioned, it's really what it was intended for and is used as currently, just a way of storing data on your browser. And really, that was originally intended for things like storing user preferences, login information, even shopping carts. So if you leave a website and come back, that data persists and you keep the same settings, what's in your shopping cart, things along those lines. So that was kind of what a cookie in general is, just a piece of information that can be stored on your browser. Now, there's the idea of first-party cookies and third-party cookies. First-party cookie is more of what I was just mentioning, that you go onto a website, you go onto bestbuy.com and you add something to your cart. Bestbuy.com places a cookie onto your browser saying, these are the items in this user's cart. So when they come back to the site, make sure that those items are still back in the user's cart. Now that's a first-party cookie because Best Buy is placing a Best Buy-related cookie on your browser. Where things start getting tricky then is the third-party cookie. So by virtue of that, for example, you might go to a website like CNN, and CNN, as you know, has advertiser supporters. So when you go to CNN, CNN may place a cookie that you want to see world news as your top headline. So that'd be the first-party cookie that's placed. But then an advertiser who is serving an ad on CNN.com may also place a cookie then on your browser that's not related, that's more related to the ads and not related to CNN. So for example, this might be what Google is placing historically on your browser, is a cookie from Google on your browser while you're visiting CNN. So by virtue of it not being related to CNN, that is now a third-party cookie. So these, again, is where the major portion of data collection has come from, is those third-party cookies. So that whenever you go to a website, a third party, an advertiser, more often than not, will place a cookie then on your browser saying, the user's seen this ad. Alternatively, too, the user has been to this page on this website. This user has interacted with these certain things on this website. And then what happens is, so you might go to CNN.com and you might interact with a specific section. So the cookie goes, oh, this person likes sports. So now whenever you go to another website that has that same advertiser on there, you'll be served ads related to sports. And this could, again, be even as specific as, again, the Best Buy example, where you add something to your cart, a third-party cookie is added to your browser that says this user put a MacBook into their cart. So now when you go onto any other website on the internet that has that advertiser's display medium on there, you're then getting hit with ads for that MacBook that you added on Best Buy. So again, you can start seeing it's a slippery slope of how information can be quickly added to your browser about you, read by another website for the benefit of advertising there. So I think that's the big takeaways there is the idea of a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie.
Okay, so Stoltz, let's get into then the death of those third-party cookies and kind of the solution now that Google's put forward. And there's a lot of solutions that are coming about. Trade Desk has had some good articles on some of this stuff. Others have as well. Adara's spoken a lot about this as well. So maybe talk about maybe the death of the third-party cookie a little bit.
Yeah, and it sounds like a dramatic headline, but it's very, very close to that. So interestingly enough, this actually was led by Google primarily. Now, again, like you mentioned, there are certain browsers, platforms out there that have prevented third-party cookies from being placed. Namely, if you have an ad blocker on your site or on your browser, rather, that will prevent cookies from being placed usually on your browser first off. So there are, again, things that have been in place previous to this, but this is sort of, again, the top dog out there, Google, who has been using third-party cookies as their primary factor of creating audiences and gathering display views, saying, hey, we're going to actually no longer be using third-party cookies and actually blocking the placement of third-party cookies in our Chrome browser. And this is something they announced in January 2020 with the goal of 2022 as sort of the end of the third-party cookie as they know it. So that's where, again, there's been a lot of chatter about this throughout the industry, but Google, again, putting a stake in the sand saying 2022, no more third-party cookies on Chrome is, again, a big hit to the advertising industry as a whole, but also that this is, again, their own tool that they used. They're actually saying, we're not going to be using this any longer either. So they're actually changing the way in which a lot of display advertisers have been traditionally creating audiences and being able to serve media on these websites.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. On the programmatic side, definitely going to affect some of the way things are placed there on networks and things of that nature. So then it kind of went into introducing the Privacy Sandbox, right?
Yeah, exactly. So of course, Google didn't say we're going to eliminate the third-party cookie without any other alternatives. Right. So what they did then is they created this, again, Privacy Sandbox, like you mentioned, which really is actually just a set of potential APIs or application protocol interfaces that will interact with your browser and advertising networks in order to gather information about users on a less individual level. So again, these are actual or potential protocols in place that Google and their developers and really developers around the world are experimenting with to see what exactly is the best way in order to still serve correct advertising to users while, again, maintain the privacy. Since a lot of websites out there are supported by ads. So if we just went off and said, hey, you can't serve ads on the internet anymore, that'd be a big hit to a lot of websites out there. So again, this is a way of trying to figure out what's the best way forward in that regard. And again, the Privacy Sandbox is a place that anyone can go to really and look at these actual protocols that are being developed. It's kind of interesting. If you want to geek out a little bit, you can actually look at the code and what's happening behind the scenes and how these APIs work. And these are all things that are really, I think, again, interesting elements there. So so I think that's, again, the Privacy Sandbox is something to check out in regards to that. So I would encourage anyone who's curious about what these things are, go check that out. We'll have some links in the description as well. But that's, again, Privacy Sandbox is less so an actual sandbox and more so a place in which people can work on collaborative projects for privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Google's made the announcement about moving more to like a cohort, right? So really, instead of targeting individual users, right, which most DMOs don't do nowadays, I'd imagine, it's moving towards more of like behaviorals and what's happening on that side, right? Putting somebody in a bucket based on what they're doing, and that's really led to the term FLoC, right? So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Definitely. So the FLoC, or Federated Learning of Cohorts, so it sounds like a fancy name, which is actually one of the protocols or one of the proposed ideas in the Privacy Sandbox as well. So what this really is users, instead of tracking them via a cookie, you are still tracked across the internet, but when an advertiser wants to access your information, you're actually now in a bucket or a large group of people. You're in a cohort. So instead of an advertiser being able to say, I want to target user 1, 2, 3, they have to say, I want to target users who look like this. So there's no actual one-to-one targeting anymore. Again, you are now in a group of people who may look like you. And by that, I mean in terms of web behaviors, demographic information, things like that. So it's less so that one-to-one targeting, which advertisers may have been used to previously, but again, a better way and a more private way, I should say, of targeting users across the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is an ever-changing place. I think it's important to note that as well. I know Google this month is open some of this up to start testing this across Google Ads and things of that nature. But I think a question for DMOs is what do they need to be aware of, right? So I think you've done a good job, Stoltz, and thank you for explaining first-party cookie versus third-party cookie. Then talking about how that's now with trying to really be more privacy centric. We're moving away from third-party cookies. Google's created a sandbox to help with this. The Federated learning of Cohorts is how they're approaching some of this stuff. But I think now let's talk about how this is going to affect DMOs specifically, or maybe some things they need to be aware of. So maybe just touch on that for a minute.
Yeah, and I guess the good news is for the vast majority of DMOs out there, these privacy changes won't affect you directly. Again, they may affect you indirectly, but the great news is this isn't something similar to GDPR, where all of a sudden overnight we're required to revamp our website, our form processes, add a pop-up banner to the website affirming our cookie policy. So the good news is this is by and large not going to affect DMOs directly. How it will affect DMOs more so is actually the agencies and the media buying platforms their agencies or those DMOs themselves use will be affected by these privacy changes and the third-party cookie. More of which will be affected by those, like I mentioned, those display vendors who use third-party cookies primarily as their targeting methods. Those are the ones who are going to be affected the most. So really, it's sort of a one step removed from a lot of this, because luckily, as you know, DMOs are the end customer of these advertising platforms. So the good news is it'll be more so affecting the agencies they're working with, who again are then contracting or buying media through these display vendors, or the display vendors themselves, just to make sure that their targeting methods now will be up to date and appropriate based off of these new standards. So really, the only thing that needs to be aware of is, again, what media buyers are working with, what agencies are working with, and how that media is being placed today, and if there will be any targeting changes. So really, that's the only major change. Other than that, it's mostly just trying to be more cognizant of first-party data, I think. Again, it's been a term thrown around a lot, is the idea of first-party data. And again, it's data that you own. That's email addresses, that's contact information, that's phone numbers, that's Facebook profile through Facebook Messenger. So there's a number of...
I mean, analytics on your own website falls in that category too.
Exactly. Right? Anytime that you can own that data, that's, again, first-party data, where you can actually see it, you can actually touch it. That's your first-party data. So instead of relying on data that is on another platform, like a display vendor relying on third-party cookies on a browser, this is now something where you sort of have the control, that you're able to now do things with that data that you wouldn't be able to do with a display vendor using cookies. Now, the good news is, though, too, through a lot of platforms like Google, like Facebook, lookalike audiences, customer match audiences will still work by virtue of the fact that Google and Facebook both own both the targeting and also the actual mediums in which they're serving their ads. Google, of course, has the Google Display Network across the site, across the internet, I should say. Facebook, of course, has Facebook and Instagram as advertising mediums. So they do have a leg up on those other vendors who were simply doing more of a spray and pray approach of placing media across the internet where they could. Whereas Google, again, they know you as a user, Facebook knows you as a user, and when you're logged in, you can be served those ads still that match your profile. So again, they're taking the power, I think, away from some of those less than savory vendors out there who are collecting the data, perhaps maybe giving themselves, and by that I mean giving Google a little bit of a leg up on the competition. So this, of course, maybe isn't necessarily totally altruistic, maybe a little self-serving, but nonetheless, I think this is a good step forward in making the internet a little bit safer for users and, of course, their data as well.
I could not agree more. I mean, you even just saw recent headlines with Facebook breaches and things of that nature. So listen, this is important stuff that's happening, right? It's probably long overdue, to be quite honest with you. It's going to really affect, to your point, third-party networks that push cookies heavily, and sometimes not always in the best interest of the end user. Actually, most of the time, probably not the best interest of them. So listen, not a lot's going to change, I don't think, on the DMO side, unless you're doing a lot of individual targeting or relying very heavily on those things, which, again, I don't think many DMOs are doing, but it's something that they absolutely need to be aware of. But moving forward then, because, again, there's still a lot that's unknown. I think we're still very much in somewhat at the beginning stages of this grant, and it's something to again, if you're a DMO, be in contact with your agency provider who's placing all this media. And I'd even start getting regular updates on this type of stuff every month in your monthly calls. But what are some things that maybe DMOs need to be aware of then moving forward beyond this point? Maybe let's end with that.
Yeah, I think like you said, I think the biggest thing is if you're working with a media buyer, work with an agency who's buying media, constant communication is key. Again, a lot of people don't know exactly how this will pan out to the end placers of that media, again, being those media vendors. So that's, again, something to just be cognizant of, is keep the lines of communication open. And again, if you were banking on a certain type of targeting for a certain audience, be aware that that audience has the potential to go away. Again, that's not a blanket statement by any means, but again, just by having that communication, you'll be significantly better off than someone who, again, just hopes that everything will remain the same, because more than likely something will change. So I think that's the biggest thing. Also, too, I think the other thing to be aware of is making sure your own measurement and data collection is up to date, properly set up. Like you mentioned, I think having any sort of analytics and tracking is, of course, more important than ever. Having any of those pixels on your site that you can then use on those other platforms like Facebook or Google as well are really, really important. So making sure all your tagging is set up correctly. And just, again, being aware that things will change. And having in the back of your mind, it's for the better. So that while in the short term, there may be some uncomfortable conversations, again, with some media buyers or some partners, in the long term, this will only help the greater internet. So I think the big takeaway here is just keep the lines of communication open. Make sure you have your data collection, your data privacy, your data policies all in place. And just be ready for change, because if there's one thing certain in digital marketing, it's that change is a constant. So much like anything else, follows that same trend. So those are, again, kind of the big picture items there. And we'll, of course, keep everyone updated as we find out more information too. But I think that, like you said, is the one big thing, is that change will be the constant for the future looking forward.
Yeah. Listen, that's been the theme for the last year with the pandemic, at least, right? So I think a lot of us are used to, and listen, DMOs are resilient. They're used to this type of thing. But all really good points. And again, I'll just reiterate that ultimately, unless you are a DMO that's relying very heavily on third-party cookies or individual data to target your audience, there's really no need to panic. This announcement is gonna have some implications on the evolution of certain products within Google and on networks after third-party cookies are phased out. But something you definitely just want to keep an eye on, and we will continue to keep you informed. But we wanted to try to clear some of the noise out with this episode and really try to share what we knew about it. And again, we're always here to help. For now, though, I think the best thing to do as a marketer is just to continue, as Grant said, to stay up to date with the news and be in regular contact with your paid media and data providers so that you can stay informed and prepared, because the space is changing all the time, and it will continue to change until things are fully rolled out in early 2022. So, Grant, thanks for coming on. It's a longer episode, but I think it's an important one. It's something we get asked a lot. So I want to thank you for coming by and really sharing your knowledge with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to everyone who's listened this far as well. I know a lot of heady topics in this, so I'm glad we could add a little bit of clarity to what is an otherwise very complex and potentially confusing situation.
It is, and we will continue to keep everybody informed. So thank you, and thanks for tuning in each and every week. If you're not subscribed, please do so now. It really helps us out a lot. Also, if you like the episode, that's something that's very important. It helps us out on the algorithm. We're also available on Spotify and iTunes. If you're looking at listening to us through audio podcasts. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time, and have a great day.